Well, I've got 301, so hopefully everyone has joined that's going to join. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So today's webinar, and let me start our presentation here. There we go. So today's webinar is your organization ready for Ohio House Bill 96? It's to help educate you about your deadlines, the IT requirements, and cyber insurance recommendations for this bill. So our goal today is to ultimately protect your entire organization and data from cyber criminals. My name is Kent Eiler with Eiler Networking and Computing. This is our 31st year of business with Eiler Networking and Computing, and we specialize in cybersecurity, compliance, managed services, and just about everything a small to mid-sized company needs related to technology. I'm joined today by Bill Brooker with Brooker Insurance. Bill, I'm glad you're here with us today because this is not just an IT topic. Ohio House Bill 96 touches cybersecurity, leadership, risk management, compliance, incident response, and of course, insurance. So I think it's important that we look at this from both sides. So Bill, can you tell us a little bit about your background at Brooker Insurance?
Thanks, Kent. Definitely glad to be part of this conversation and glad to be able to help people wrap their minds around this legislation. But Brooker Insurance is a fourth generation family insurance brokerage located here in Strongsville, Ohio. We specialize in all aspects of business insurance, with my personal individual focus being on cyber insurance, tree services, and manufacturers. I've been a licensed insurance agent for 19 years and have my CPCU designation, which identifies me as a top advisor in the insurance field. From the insurance side, we see cyber risk becoming just an unavoidable issue for organizations of all sizes. A cyber incident can create costs that go well beyond just fixing your computers or fixing your devices. It involves legal expenses, forensic investigations, notification costs, business interruption, lost revenue, ransomware response, and questions about whether an organization's insurance coverage is even prepared for that kind of event. So I think this is a very timely conversation.
Oh, exactly. So our goal today is to keep this practical and understandable. We're not here to overwhelm anyone with technical language, and I'll do my best not to do that, but we're not here to scare anyone either. We don't want to suggest that every organization has to solve everything overnight. What we want to help you do is to understand what Ohio House Bill 96 is asking for through Ohio Revised Section Code 9.64, what the major deadlines are, what the IT and cybersecurity requirements mean at a high level, and how cyber insurance fits into the bigger risk management picture here. So Eiler Networking and Computing will focus on the technology, the cybersecurity, documentation, and compliance readiness side. Bill and Brooker Insurance will help explain the insurance and risk transfer side. The encouraging part of this is cybersecurity readiness is not about being perfect. It's about being prepared, being intentional, documenting your approach, and making steady progress. Before we go any further, if you have any questions during this webinar, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your window. It should have a question mark there in Q&A. If you don't see that, click the three dots that are off to the right and it says more, and you should see the Q&A button there. So any questions that you have, and then at the end of the presentation, Bill and I will answer those. So let's start with the big picture question. What does Ohio House Bill 96 actually mean for your organization? So Ohio Revised Code 9.64 that was enacted through Ohio House Bill 96 created new cybersecurity expectations for Ohio political subdivisions. So in plain English, the law is saying that covered organizations need to formally adopt a cybersecurity program, report certain cybersecurity incidents, and follow a defined process before paying a ransom demand. Now that phrase, cybersecurity program, is important. A cybersecurity program is more than just antivirus. It's more than just backups. It's more than having someone to call when the computer stops working. A cybersecurity program is your organization's documented approach to reducing cyber risk. So it helps to answer questions like, who's responsible for cybersecurity? What systems and data are most important? How are the employees trained? How do we protect accounts and devices? How do we detect suspicious activity? What do we do if something goes wrong? Who do we notify? How do we recover? And how do we prove that we are actually doing these things? So for leadership, the big change is that cybersecurity can no longer be treated as something that only belongs in the IT room. It belongs in leadership conversations, budget conversations, risk management conversations, and insurance conversations. So, Bill, from the insurance side, when you hear that cybersecurity is becoming more of a leadership and risk management issue, how do you think an organization should be looking at that?
I think that's exactly the right way to frame it, and that is how most businesses and organizations that I work with are starting to see it. From an insurance standpoint, cyber risk is not just whether your computers are working; it's about the potential financial impact if something goes wrong. If you think about a manufacturer, it's not just that your machine goes down; it's how much revenue you're losing and payroll you're losing while that machine is down. So really, we want to focus on not just the actual devices and the actual hardware itself, but it's really the financial and legal implications of an attack. So if an organization has a ransomware attack, a data breach, an email compromise, or a funds transfer scam, the cost can add up really quickly. And there's, like I said, legal expenses, forensic costs, there's notification requirements, downtime, recovery expense, and reputational damage. You very well could lose customers and vendors and partners because of something like this. So when we talk about House Bill 96, I think leaders should hear this as a reminder that cybersecurity needs to be part of an organization's overall risk management strategy. And insurance can be part of that strategy, but it's not the whole picture. And it certainly does not replace cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Bill, because cybersecurity helps reduce the likelihood and impact of an incident. Insurance then helps address some of the financial consequences if an incident still happens. So the first major takeaway is this: House Bill 96 is not just about checking a box, it's about creating a practical, documented, leadership supported cybersecurity program. So there's several dates and timing issues organizations we've got to just understand. So counties and cities have an earlier deadline, and other political subdivisions have a later deadline for adopting a cybersecurity program. So depending on your organization, your deadline may have already passed, or it may be coming quickly. So counties and cities had a deadline of January 1st of this year. So if you're one of those, you've already passed that deadline if it's not implemented. For libraries, schools, park system, and other entities, that deadline is July 1st of 2026. But there's another timing issue that you should be aware of as well, and it's just as important. It's your incident reporting. If an organization discovers a cybersecurity incident, it needs to understand who must be notified, when they must be notified, and who is internally responsible for making that happen. And this is where the planning becomes very, very practical. If something happens, the first few hours can be very confusing. It's going to be stressful, and people could be asking, is this really a cyber incident? Are systems down? Did we have data that was exposed? How can we restore from backup? Should we call our IT provider? Do we contact insurance? Do we need to contact legal counsel? Do we have to notify anyone at the state? And who's authorized to make decisions and who is authorized to speak publicly? Excuse me. So, Bill, this is one of those areas where I think the insurance side needs to be part of the plan. I'm going to get a drink while you talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, Ken. From the insurance side, organizations need to know in advance, how to report a potential cyber claim or a cyber event that's occurred to them. Many policies are going to require prompt notice, so you'll need to notify your insurance company within a certain period of time. Some policies may have preferred vendors that you need to use, breach coaches that you need to use, legal resources, forensic firms, or specific claim procedures that need to be followed in order for coverage to trigger. So one of those things we encourage organizations to do is make sure that their incident response plan includes their cyber insurance information. This means that when something happens, you know who contacts the insurance carrier, what number do we call, what policy information do we need, are there approved vendors, should legal counsel be involved before certain decisions are made, what should we be careful not to do, okay? Because in that first 8 hours, when you come into the office and maybe realize that there's a cyber event occurring, your natural gut instinct is going to be to react. And oftentimes that means doing things that you're going to regret down the line, maybe a week later or 2 weeks later after you get legal counsel involved. A great example that I share often is, someone comes into their workstation, they see that their email has been hacked and 500 emails were sent out without their knowledge. Their gut instinct may be to immediately tell people, "Hey, I was hacked. This isn't me. Don't respond to this." Or, you're starting to use language of what happened when in reality that individual doesn't really know what has happened. It could have been a multitude of different types of things, and legal counsel would probably advise against using some of that more incendiary language in a rather wait and see approach. So, not making some of those mistakes in those first 8 hours is just as important as doing the right things in those first 8 hours. So, you definitely want to have this stuff, prepared ahead of time, because the middle of a cyber incident is not the time to start looking for your insurance policy and trying to figure out, who do I call? What do I do?
That's so true, Bill. So from the IT side of things, we often talk about the technical response, disconnecting systems, preserving evidence, stopping the spread, restoring backups, and figuring out what happened. But if the insurance side has specific procedures, those need to be part of the response plan too. And like Bill was saying, you don't want to build your incident response plan during the incident. You want to build it before. So let's translate the IT and cyber requirements into everyday language. This is the part where people sometimes get nervous because cybersecurity can sound complicated. But at a high level, it's really very understandable. A practical cybersecurity program should really help your organization do several things. And on this slide, we have 4 key ones listed, and I've got 4 more on the next slide. So first, know what you have. You can't protect what you don't know exists. This means knowing, what computers, servers, software, email systems, cloud accounts, financial systems, record systems, security cameras, phone systems, and other technology your organization relies on. One of the things we're seeing here, especially with the rapid rise of AI, there are so many AI systems that employees are using that managers don't even know about. So having a handle of this really helps you become prepared. And then second, know what matters most, because not every system carries the same level of risk. If one employee's printer stops working, that's definitely inconvenient. But if your payroll system, accounting system, public record system, student utility system, or public safety system goes down, those are much bigger issues. So third, protect access. A lot of cyber incidents begin with stolen passwords, phishing emails, and unauthorized access. This is why multi-factor authentication, or MFA, is so important. MFA simply means that logging in requires more than just a password. And then fourth, keep systems updated. Updates and patches they're not exciting, but they definitely matter. So cyber criminals often look for known weaknesses in outdated systems. When there's a software company like Microsoft and they patch something for Windows, they're patching this, and normally there's a result of some type of bug or vulnerability. And what they're going to do is they're going to document what this vulnerability is and make this public. Well, that gives the bad guys access to, okay, here's a known vulnerability. Let's see if we can get access to those systems before people have taken the time to patch those systems. And there's a lot of people that just don't ever patch their systems. So fifth, train employees. Now, we go through our cybersecurity training and say employees are the biggest risk, but we don't want employees to be viewed as the weakest link. They should be viewed as the first line of defense, and training helps staff recognize what these risks are, from phishing emails to fake invoices, payment redirection scams, unusual login prompts, and suspicious requests. They always say, don't open an attachment from someone who you don't know and trust. Well, we're seeing the supply chain attacks are very successful because companies are used to seeing emails and attachments and invoices from their supply chain. So when they get something, they don't hesitate to open it up. So you got to be careful to make sure it's truly from those vendors. Sixth, monitor for threats. It's not enough to hope that nothing bad is going to happen. Organizations need some way to detect suspicious activity, and the monitoring and watching for those things will trigger alerts and get your IT team looking at them so that they can stop something before it gets going too far. Seventh, Have backups, and the key thing here is test them. You wouldn't believe how many companies we've heard horror stories of that their IT provider had done backups for them, but never tested them. And then when they had some type of disaster and they needed to restore from them, the backups were not good. So the question should not be, hey, do we have backups? The better questions are, can we restore from them? How long would recovery take? Are the backups protected from ransomware? We call that immutable backups. And when were they last tested? Finally, here, eighth, we have an incident response plan. And so this should be a written plan that explains who does what, basically when something goes wrong. So, Bill, I know many of those items also show up on cyber insurance applications. Can you talk about why these questions matter?
Absolutely. Cyber insurance applications often ask about the exact same safeguards that you just mentioned. They're going to ask, do you use multi-factor authentication? Do you have endpoint protection? Do you test your backups? Do you train your employees? Do you restrict administrative access? Do you have an incident response plan that's written out? Do you have secure remote access? Do you patch systems regularly? These are key questions that insurance carriers are trying to ask to better understand an organization's risk profile. If an application says that MFA is in place, but it's only actually partially in place, that can create a lot of problems for an insurance policy. If the application says that backups are tested, but no one knows when they were last tested, that's a major concern. If the application says that employees receive cybersecurity training, but there's no documentation that that's the case, that may also become an issue. So the application should not be completed based on guesses or assumptions. It's always best to simply be honest about your existing current setup. Yes, you may want to improve your setup before going the step of improving your cyber insurance policy. But insurance companies want to know not, every organization, insurance companies know that not every organization is going to have, a Fort Knox level of protection. The key here is to be honest about what you have and what you don't have, and lean on your vendors to advise you on what's best for your individual organization.
Yeah, that's very important. And from the IT side, we can help validate what is actually in place. From the insurance side, broker can help explain what policy is asking for and why it matters. The cybersecurity program, the actual IT environment, and cyber insurance application should all tell the same story. So, cybersecurity is not one magic product, it's a set of habits, safeguards, tools, policies, people with training, and decisions that are working together. So let's talk about now what compliance looks like day to day. One of the biggest misunderstandings about compliance is that people think it's just paperwork. Documentation matters, but real compliance is not just a binder on the shelf. Real compliance is what your organization does, consistency. Think of it like financial controls. You don't simply say, we care about money. You have approvals, processes, reports, there's oversights. We do audits and accountability, and cybersecurity needs to work the same way. Day-to-day compliance may include new employees getting the right access and the limited access. We like the minimal access necessary for them to do their job. Former employees having access removed quickly. Passwords and multi-factor authentication being managed properly. Backups being monitored and tested. Security alerts being reviewed in a timely manner. Employees receiving training. Policies being updated anytime there's changes. Leadership reviewing the risk. And incidents being documented. Insurance requirements being reviewed. Vendor access being controlled, and critical systems being identified. This is where recognized frameworks can help. So a framework is nothing fancy. It's simply a structured guide. It helps your organization to avoid guessing. There are two frameworks that we recommend, and that's NIST CSF, which stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. And there's also CIS controls, which that's by the Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls. So NIST CSF and CIS is helpful for helping organizing the big picture. It helps leadership think about how the organization governs, identifies, protects, detects, responds, and recovers from a cybersecurity risk. Now, what's interesting there with this CSF is out of those 6 pillars I just mentioned, 3 of them are for the planning process ahead of time. but three of them, half of them, are after an incident already happens. So that's how likely an incident is and why it's important to take these steps to do that. CIS controls are very practical and action oriented. They help answer the question, what should we actually do first? And one of the great things about being here in Ohio, back in 2018, Ohio was one of the first states to make Ohio a safe harbor state. So if you are NIST CSF compliant and you do get some type of cyber attack or let's say a data breach, and you've got data that's been exposed, you are protected legally against fees and fines because the state of Ohio said you're following NIST CSF. This is a proven framework, and you have done your due diligence on protecting your data. So, Bill, from your side, when an organization can show that it's using a recognized framework or working through a structured process, how does that help with the insurance conversation?
It definitely helps because it shows an organization is taking cyber risk seriously. Insurance carriers, they want to know whether an organization has basic safeguards in place and whether leadership understands and respects the risk. When I'm going out to the market to look at, 4 or 5 different cyber insurance providers, they're asking all of the questions that appear in a questionnaire, but they also have a lot more flexibility than maybe your standard lines of insurance coverage, like insurance on a building, for example. A lot of insurance on buildings is regulated by the state, and there's only so much wiggle room that insurance providers can give. Cyber insurance, in many ways, is kind of like the Wild West because it's not as regulated, which means there's not as much standardization, which is in some ways bad, but in some ways good. And one of the good ways is that it allows insurance companies to be more aggressive with their pricing when they feel really good about the protections that a certain organization has in place. So that is a conversation that I'm having with underwriters, and while no particular framework guarantees a certain percentage, better rate or better coverages, it definitely supports a stronger conversation, and it shows that there's a plan and not just random, activity or patchwork type security. It also helps organizations answer insurance questions more accurately because if you have a framework and a documentation process in place, you have a clearer picture of what's actually being done, and therefore your insurance application is going to be more accurate and correct.
Exactly, Bill. A framework does not secure your organization by itself. It's the roadmap for it. And for many organizations, the right next step then is don't try to do everything at once. The right next step is to choose a framework. We'd recommend this CSF, assess where you are today, identify the biggest gaps, and then build a reasonable plan. And this is where finding the right partner could really help. So a good partner should be able to help you understand the framework, translate it into plain English, prioritize what matters most, document your progress, and help you to maintain that program over time. And I can't emphasize enough the documentation. So if you do have an event, you've got to have that evidence, that proof that you were doing what you needed to be doing, not just once, but quarterly or monthly, even depending on what your policies state. So for organizations looking for more information, check out the official NIST website through the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and the Center for Internet Security website for CIS controls. There's a lot of public resources and all the information's there. You're not going to be charged for it. And so leadership teams can understand and what the structure is behind these frameworks. However, most organizations will also benefit from having a qualified partner help translate those frameworks into a practical plan. So remember, a framework is going to give you the roadmap, but a partner is going to help you walk through the roadmap. So let's talk about one of the best tools for deciding where to start, and we call that the risk assessment. A risk assessment is not to embarrass you or anything like that. It's not meant to prove that everything's broken. It is meant to help leadership make a decision. And a good risk assessment is going to help answer questions such as, again, what are our most important systems? We talked about that already. What data do we store? Who has access to that data, and where does that data live? And what's going to happen if all these systems went down? Where are we most vulnerable? What safeguards do we already have, and what gaps should we address first? And then if there are any risks, how can we reduce those? And what risks may we need to be insured? Without this risk assessment, cybersecurity decisions can become random. Organizations may spend money based on fear, vendor pressure, budget leftovers, or whatever problem happened most recently. With a risk assessment, though, the conversation becomes more organized. You can say, here are our biggest risks. Here are the most important gaps. Here's what we should do first. And here's what we should budget for next. So, Bill, risk assessment is very much an insurance concept. How should organizations think about the connection between risk assessment and insurance?
Yeah, I mean that connection is very important. Insurance is about risk transfer, but before you can transfer the risk, you need to understand what the risk is. Some risk can be reduced through technology, some can be reduced through deeper employee training, some can be reduced through better procedures, some can be reduced through contracts or vendor management, and some financial risk can be transferred through insurance. And None of that works very well if the organization has not identified what the real exposure is. So when an organization does a cybersecurity assessment, and one may be done by a cyber insurance provider even during the quoting process, but it can also, make your insurance review more meaningful. It's a partnership, right? Like we said, and it needs to go hand in hand with your cyber security vendor and your cyber insurance provider. Both parties want to make sure that the organization is as protected as possible. And we can look at that risk assessment, and we can look at whether the coverages line up with the risk that the organization actually faces.
That really makes sense. So the risk assessment becomes a bridge between IT, leadership, compliance, and insurance. And cybersecurity reduces the likelihood and impact of an incident. Unfortunately, I don't want to scare anyone out there, but there is nothing that you can do to protect yourself 100%. Our goal is to get you there to 99.999%. But if you look at our government organizations, the FBI, the CIA, they have millions that they spend on cybersecurity, and they still have it as incidents. So we want to make it not worthwhile for the bad guys to get in. So insurance will help address some of the financial consequences if an incident still happens. Compliance documents what the organization is doing. Leadership determines and decides what risk is acceptable, and then what needs to be addressed. So risk assessment turns cybersecurity from a guessing game into a leadership conversation. So now, Bill, this is a good place, I think, for us to shift more directly into the insurance side. We've talked about, the safeguards, the frameworks, and risk assessments. Can you walk us through what organizations should be reviewing in their cyber insurance coverage?
Absolutely, Ken. The first thing I would say is to reiterate that cyber insurance is not a substitute for cybersecurity. I often use the analogy of you need to put a roof on your house before you get insurance on your house. You need to protect your organization. Cyber insurance alone is not going to stop a phishing email. It's not going to patch your system. It does not train your employees, and it does not restore your backups. But it is also a very important part of the overall risk management strategy. It's that safety net that protects you from having a business ending event. And instead of having the worst day of your organization's life, it's just a bad day. A cyber incident can create many different types of costs. The cost of hiring legal counsel, for a forensic investigation into your files, notification expenses of exposed individuals, the cost to restore your data, business interruption, that time down where you're not able to operate at full capacity is a huge financial risk. Ransomware response, potentially paying out some sort of ransom, public relations costs, the potential liability that you have to your customers and vendors. This is why organizations should review their cyber liability coverage before an incident happens. Not all cyber policies are the same. Like I said earlier, it's very much an unregulated, unstandardized industry right now. So every cyber insurance policy that I review is different in very different ways. So that's why you need to have somebody that's looking through those details and is able to look at the definitions, because what one insurance company defines as funds transfer fraud could be something totally different from what another insurance company defines as funds transfer fraud.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that you can't even just look at the actual insuring agreements. You need to go deeper and actually look at the definitions of what do you define as this, to really find out what your coverage is. It's a very confusing process for most people, which is why I've been an advocate for more standardization in the industry. It's just a problem that we have to confront, because it's every insurance company is trying to define things in a way that's advantageous to them. But just some areas that we want to review when we look through a cyber insurance policy is, what's the coverage for breach response? The ransomware or cyber extortion coverage. A lot of companies will just flat out exclude that, and many people don't even know that that's excluded in their policy. Business interruption coverage, that's going to be huge. What is the triggering event? Some people, business interruption coverage won't trigger unless there is physical damage to physical property. I want to look at the cyber policy and see, does that exclusion apply on this policy? Data restoration, forensic investigation, legal expenses, notification costs. All of these things are going to just drive up the total cost of your claim. I believe that the average claim in 2025 was somewhere around $150,000. That's because of all of these different types of costs. Social engineering is one of the coverages that companies least like to provide. So you almost certainly have a lower social engineering sublimit than what your total top limit is for your insurance policy. So you can't just look at, oh, I have $1 million cyber insurance liability policy. Look deeper down and see, okay, what's my limit for funds transfer fraud? What's my limit for social engineering? Those are almost always significantly decreased from the overall limit. And in reality, what a struggle that I have when I'm going to underwriters is trying to buy as much as we can. Insurance companies, because there's those types of claims are so difficult to limit, they're often not even offering limits above, say, 100,000 or 250,000 or 500,000 in coverage, because they can't themselves, as the insurance company, wrap their minds around containing those types of risks. So I'm going to immediately go to that section when I'm reviewing a cyber policy. All of those limits, the sub limits, the exclusions, the policy conditions, all of them matter when it comes to looking at your overall plan of protection. Let me explain a few of those just sort of in plain language. So a breach response would mean the services that help you respond if data may have been accessed or exposed. This may involve attorneys, forensic experts, notification support, and sometimes credit monitoring or call center support. Ransomware or cyber extortion coverage addresses certain costs related to ransomware events. Think of that as, ransom is obviously a word everybody is aware of. Somebody comes in and they lock you out of your system and says, hey, you need to forward X amount of dollars in Bitcoin to this account. That is a ransomware attack, and your cyber policy is going to have a separate limit for that type of attack. Business interruption addresses the financial impact of downtime. For many organizations, the major cost of a cyber incident is not just the repair work or the data restoration, it's the disruption in operations. If you're a manufacturer and you do, say, $24 million a year in revenue, and because of a cyber event, you were down for 6 months, that's potentially $12 million of revenue that you may not get back. If you're in a service industry or a high trust industry, like an accounting firm, and you have to notify a significant portion of your clientele that you had a data breach, you very well, could lose a lot of revenue from that, that knowledge being disseminated. So the business interruption helps protect against those types of things. Social engineering and funds transfer fraud are also extremely important. I talked about, why those limits are often so, reduced by so much. These involve scams where someone is being tricked into sending money, changing payment instructions. A bad actor changes an email around to make it look like you need to send money to a different account than maybe you had previously. Your employee responds to that fake vendor and redirects payments to an account that most likely goes overseas, and you never see that money again. All of that is extremely important. Is an extremely important part of your risk, And not every policy covers these the way that you probably assume that they are covered. That is why they need to be reviewed very carefully.
Yeah, Bill, that social engineering one is huge. From the IT side, we see phishing and fake invoice attempts all the time. A lot of organizations, I think, they'll assume, well, if we get tricked by email, that must be covered by cyber insurance. But it sounds like that might not always be the case.
That is definitely correct. Coverage depends on the policy language. Some policies may include social engineering coverage. Some may offer it as an endorsement. Some may have significant sublimits. Some may have specific conditions the organization has to follow, such as callback verification or dual approval of payments. So organizations should not just assume, they should review it or have somebody review it with them. It is also very possible that they need more coverage than insurance companies are even willing to sell. Like I said earlier, such a difficult threat to contain, and it scares insurance companies away from offering full limits because they just worry about somebody in the accounting office forwarding $1 million on a big construction project that looks legitimate. But once that money has changed hands, it's very difficult to get that back, and that's a significant amount of money to lose in just a matter of seconds. That should, but the fact that these insurance companies are afraid to offer these limits should tell you something about the risk organizations are taking when they have extremely low limits, because nobody understands the risk better than the insurance companies do. And if they're afraid to offer the coverage, it tells you how exposed you are when you have, say, only a $10,000 limit or a $50,000 limit for social engineering.
Wow, that makes sense. So another area I think about is ransomware. From the technical side, we talk a lot about backups, endpoint protection, monitoring, and incident response. But ransomware also creates insurance and governance issues. And for the last 10 years, ransomware has been, comes in, it encrypts files and blocks access to them. One of the new attacks that we're seeing with ransomware is a bad actor will get in and they might be in there for 60, 90 days and they could be exfiltrating all of the data on the server. In fact, this happened to someone I heard about in New York. And so they didn't encrypt the files. They basically stole a copy of all the data and then they demanded a ransom to not release that out on the dark web. And so it's really scary because this is our 31st year in business. I thought we're really protecting our clients because we've got immutable backups. We are protecting all of their data, but it's not just protecting their data on their systems. Now we really have to make sure that the bad guys don't get the copy of their data and release that publicly when they shouldn't be out there. So how should organizations be thinking about ransomware?
Yeah, ransomware is a great example of why this needs to be planned in advance. A ransomware event may involve legal counsel, forensic investigation, negotiation resources, recovery costs, there's business interruption. But with public entities, there may be legal or governance requirements before a ransom payment can even be considered. So the organization should know in advance who's going to make the decisions, who needs to approve certain actions, what does the policy allow. A very key component in policies right now is, does it include pay on behalf of language, or does it include pay a reimbursement to the policyholder? Basically, what that means is some insurance companies may, if you have a ransom, they may pay on your behalf. It could, because they have Bitcoin, they're ready to pay these bad actors, and then hopefully they'll go through the negotiation process and all that. Other insurance companies, they will not pay on behalf of, they will require the policyholder to actually pay the ransom, and then the insurance company will reimburse that policyholder. But not everybody has Bitcoin readily available. It could take you days or over a week to move money where it needs to be in order to pay that ransom. So I like to place insurance with companies that will have that pay on behalf of language in there, because it reduces the amount of downtime. All of this stuff is just hidden in the nitty gritty details of the insurance policy, and it's not going to be something you're going to find on page 1 or 2. So that's why it's really important that we answer those questions. It's part of our response plan. We're looking at what vendors should be contacted. what documentation is required. Do we have any legal requirements? A lot of this is going to be a little bit case by case because how the attack actually occurred may dictate your response. But we always go back to, at the end of the day, this is not something you want to figure out in the middle of the event. You want to figure it out before something happens.
Exactly, Bill. And from the IT side, we would add that the best ransomware plan is not simply we'll pay if we have to. The best plan is to reduce the chance of attack, detect it quickly, contain it, and recover from the backups, when you need to. But Bill, you mentioned policy conditions, and I think that's another area where organizations may not, realize how closely insurance and IT are connected.
Yes. Policy conditions are very important. We've talked about a couple of things. I brought up the pay on behalf of language. Another one that is really important is just your patch management. Some insurance policies have a scale within the policy, an actual table showing what percentage of your limit you are eligible for based on how many days late you are on downloading a particular software update or patch. Meaning that if you are, say, 150 days late on updating a patch or updating a piece of software on your system, you may only have, say, 40% of the limit that you think you have. All of these conditions are extremely important. I've seen double deductibles where they have a policy deductible and then they have a coverage deductible that tacks on another, 2,500 or another $5,000 of out-of-pocket expense, depending on how the attack occurred. We've talked about, how insurance applications often ask whether certain safeguards are in place. They're asking all of those things because those conditions matter. When you're answering, do you use multi-factor authentication? Do you have endpoint protection? Do you test your backups? How often are you testing your backups? Do you train your employees? How often are you training your employees? Do you restrict administrative access? The patches, are they being updated regularly? Do you secure remote access? All of those answers matter quite a bit. The organization should not guess. The person completing the application should not have to answer these questions alone. It's an ensemble approach. If they're not familiar with the technical environment, but they're maybe more aware of the financial environment, both people need to be involved in filling out that application to ensure that it's as accurate as possible. Um, it, 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 some conditions could, like I said, limit the amount of coverage that you have 80 to 90%, depending on how those conditions are particularly met. And if you represent yourself as an entity, as an organization that is doing certain things, and the insurance company finds out that that may not be the case, you almost certainly will be hit with a reduction in coverage.
Wow. Well, that's where we recommend involving both the insurance advisor and the IT provider before the application is completed or renewed. Because from the IT side, we can help validate what is actually in place. There are a lot of people that make assumptions. Oh, yeah, we're doing that, aren't we? Or things like that. But if you say that you're doing something and you're not doing it, and you have an incident that comes down, that's really going to impact the outcome as well. So from the insurance side, broker can explain what the policy is asking, and what the coverage applies and what gaps may exist.
Exactly. The goal is for the policy, the application, and the IT environment to all line up perfectly. If the application says that MFA is in place, the organization should know where it is in place. If the application says backups are tested, the organization should know when and how. If the application says that employees are trained, the organization should have the documented details of that training. The worst time to discover that a coverage gap exists is after a claim.
That's a great line, Bill. And I think it's one of the most important insurance takeaways today. The worst time to discover a coverage gap is after a claim. So the practical recommendation is this: before renewal, review your cyber insurance policy with a broker. At the same time, validate your cybersecurity safeguards with ILR or your IT provider, and make sure both sides match and everything is accurate. So let's bring this all together with the common gaps and the next steps. So as we close, this is, really practical, hopefully for you. You realize that as well, because Ohio House Bill 96 should not be viewed as, a requirement, it's really an opportunity. This gives your organization a reason to step back and make sure that you're protecting your systems, you're protecting your data, you're protecting your employees, you're protecting the public. Are you prepared if something goes wrong? Are you properly insured? Are we documenting what we're doing? No formal cybersecurity program is a huge gap. They're just doing what either their IT provider or their IT department says without knowing there is an official framework that will guide you with this. And so, having that written incident response plan so you can go to that if and when a cyber incident happens. Defined processes for reporting incidents. MFA is only partially implemented. Backups that exist, but they're not tested. That's the worst feeling. You've got an incident and you think your backups are good and you go to restore and you can't get the data back. So employees that haven't received the recent security training, statistics have shown that 5 to 6 months after an employee goes through cybersecurity training, they stop remembering that and they start clicking on things they shouldn't have. So we recommend an employee training that does these little micro trainings. They're like 2 to 3 minute trainings, but it's done monthly. And that just helps keep cybersecurity in the front of your employees' minds. Outdated equipment or software. There are many companies out there that still have systems running Windows 10. Microsoft stops doing Windows 10 updates in October of last year. So if there's a new vulnerability that comes out for Windows 10, Microsoft is not going to patch that. And that can be used as a way to get in to your system. No regular risk assessments. That's something you should do regularly. A tabletop exercise basically is sitting around a table with key players and you pretend the cyber incident just happens. And then you go through, okay, pull out your incident response plan and kind of walk it through it virtually. This really helps because when you actually have a real plan, you've already practiced it. It's kind of like in school, we used to do the tornado drills and things like that. So if a tornado actually hits, you know exactly what to do. So make sure that you review your cyber insurance recently. Insurance applications completed without IT validation are a big issue. So make sure that's in line with that. Make sure you don't have policies that exist but are not followed. So Bill, from the insurance side, what would you say some of the common gaps are that you would want organizations to look for?
Yeah, definitely a few come to mind. First, organizations may not know whether they actually have a standalone cyber policy or whether they're relying on limited cyber coverage attached to another policy. This may sound silly to some people, but it's a simple challenge. Everyone on this call should be able to physically put their hands on their cyber insurance policy or hover their cursor over the PDF that contains their cyber policy. This is step one. Understand whether you have a policy and where it is located. You would be surprised how many people I talk to that could not find a copy of their cyber insurance policy if they had to. Knowing where something is the first step to improving it. Second, they may not know their limits or sublimits. You do not just look at the top limit and assume that that limit applies to everything. Like we talked about, the sublimits are so important, especially on the most critical coverages. Cyber insurance policies are actually structured like a bundle of 20 different insurance policies all wrapped together. The limit on network liability is not the same as the limit on social engineering. Third, they may assume ransomware, business interruption, social engineering, or funds transfer fraud are covered when the policy may limit or exclude certain things. With funds transfer fraud in particular, the definitions are key, like I mentioned, because there could be language in one policy that defines it a different way from how you want it defined. Fourth, they may not understand the conditions that they're expected to meet. I see it all the time where people, aren't sure. Am I required to do this as part of my policy? Well, let's look at the conditions and let's see what you are expected to meet in the event of a claim. A fifth gap that I would mention is they may not, have a clear claim reporting process. This includes how an employee should handle reporting an incident to their manager. So if somebody shows up to their workstation one day and they see that they're locked out and it's clear that, a cyber event has occurred, what is their next step? What are they doing in the next 30 minutes? Okay, what they do in the next 30 minutes are going to dictate what happens to you in the first 8 hours. And that is a critical time period where you don't want to be making mistakes and you want to make sure that you're following everything by the book. So a practical step that we keep harping on is to review the policy before something happens.
Yeah, that's a great list. So from our side, we can help organizations with cybersecurity and compliance readiness, and that can include assessments, risk review, cybersecurity program development, documentation, endpoint protection, MFA, backup review, employee training, incident response planning, alignment with frameworks such as NIST, CSF, and CIS controls. And we have tools that make that easy to collect the evidence and preserve that. Because again, if you have an incident, you're going to have to show that evidence of where you were during that time. So, Bill, how would you summarize how you can help with broker insurance?
Yeah, broker insurance can help organizations review their cyber liability coverage and identify possible gaps. Like I've said, cyber insurance policy is a very complicated set of policies, and you need to look into the conditions and the definitions. And we try to simplify that down as much as we possibly can. We take a simple approach that acknowledges that there is a lot of jargon out there, but we use a very simple spotlight visual aid that shows, red light is our higher urgency items where we need to stop what we're doing and immediately address this issue. Yellow light are items that, deserve further discussion. Maybe an individual business owner or project leader may have a different risk, appetite than another. And we're going to work with, the individual policyholder to create, limits that fit their business. And then green light is just items that are maybe in a good place, but they deserve a quick mention because, while we're talking about insurance, it's easy to, brush past certain topics that are really important. So green light just allows us to, highlight some things that are good to know, because you don't necessarily need to be, the biggest risk management professional out there, but knowing a little bit more about your company's risk management is definitely a good thing. And then lastly, we help organizations prepare for the claims reporting process and outline those do's and don'ts of the first 8 hours.
So this combined approach is really the key. Your trusted IT partner should help reduce the chance of an impact during a cyber incident. Your insurance is going to help prepare for the financial and operational consequences if an incident still occurs. And when these two pieces are aligned, leadership is in a much stronger position. So here are the practical next steps we recommend. Confirm whether Ohio House Bill 96 applies to your organization. Know your cybersecurity program deadline. Adopt or begin developing a formal cybersecurity program, but choose a recognized framework such as NIST, CSF, or CIS controls. That's going to protect you, especially here in Ohio with the safe harbor state. And it's going to be a proven method and framework to make sure you're doing the best and you're truly your due diligence for protecting your systems. Complete a cybersecurity risk assessment. Review your key safeguards. That's your MFA, your backups, endpoint protection, patching, employee training, and incident response. Review your cyber insurance policy with your agent. Make sure that your insurance applications matches your real IT environment, because if they don't and you have an incident, you're going to have problems. Document your plan, review it regularly with leadership, and find qualified partners who can help you maintain the program over time.
And I would just add, we do not want to wait until an incident occurs to figure out your technology. I've seen claims occur when an organization is prepared and has excellent, technology and network security in place. And I have seen claims occur when an organization was asleep at the wheel, and the difference is staggering. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars difference between a prepared organization and an unprepared organization.
Wow.
Luckily, we have seen, believe it or not, while frequency of claims has gone up year over year for quite a while now, severity of claims has actually dropped 3 years in a row. And a lot of that is because companies are waking up to this and becoming more prepared and getting their tech side right, which is severely mitigating the worst case scenarios. If you're not looking at that, you are exposed to those worst case scenarios, and the bad actors are looking for companies and organizations exactly like you. So the last thing that I will just share is that if you want to email me and ask for this report, I can actually share the 2026 Coalition Claims Cyber Claims report with everyone that has statistics like those trends that I was just mentioning about the severity and frequency going on in the industry.
Wow, that's awesome that you got a report like that, Bill. So I just want to reiterate, you don't have to do everything at once, but you do need to start. So start by understanding where are you today, identify the most important gaps, build that practical plan, review your insurance, and then work with partners who can help you move forward. So with that, Bill and I would love to open it up for questions. Remember, at the bottom of the screen there's the question mark that you can click on, type that in there, and as we see something come through there, we will answer those questions. So one question that came up here, Bill, is am I protected against cyber events with my general liability insurance for my organization?
Yeah, that's definitely an easy one, Kent, and that's definitely not. That would be like saying, "Am I, is my house insured because of my auto insurance?" They're very completely different things. Some, package policies, which a lot of people confuse with general liability insurance, but some package policies will include sort of a throw-in amount of cyber insurance coverage. It's typically going to be anywhere from 25 to 50 to maybe $100,000 worth of coverage, but those sublimits are going to be significantly discounted where social engineering may only be $10,000 or $25,000 or something like that. Really, you almost certainly need to be exploring a standalone cyber insurance policy. Again, kind of going back to that theme of the lack of standardization, and the lack of regulation on the cyber insurance side. One of the good parts about that is that there are a lot of options, and there are a lot of things that you can do to significantly improve your insurance coverage without having to break the bank. There are a lot of insurance companies that are specifically built for cyber insurance that we have access to. And so shopping that around is often, extremely quick. It's a pretty painless process, and it's a best practice to have somebody take a look at that, because it is definitely not included in just your basic general liability policy. And even if it is included, it is almost certainly a limit, maybe around $25,000, $50,000, when, I'm regularly quoting limits of $250,000, $500,000 for relatively the same price. So we're talking, sometimes a 10x multiplier in coverage for a almost negligible increase in your total premiums.
That's really interesting. But so one question that brings from my standpoint, how do I know how much cyber liability coverage I need?
Well, one of the things that I like to look at is that report that I mentioned earlier, which talks about the average the average claim cost. We're looking at somewhere between 150 and $200,000. It also depends on the size of your organization. What type of information are you storing in your systems? How good is your email protection? If somebody were to hack into over 50% of cyber claims originate from an employee email account. So we want to see, okay, are we storing a lot of emails? Are those emails containing sensitive information? All of those factors are going to be multipliers to how severe a claim is going to be. Look at your funds transfer fraud. I think funds transfer fraud is a little bit over 20% of claims. Look how much money you're transferring. Are you allowing someone within your organization to transfer $50,000, but maybe your funds transfer fraud sum limit is only $10,000? That's a significant risk that you're leaving exposed. So let's look at those sublimits, look at how your organization operates, and then that's going to tell us how much you actually need. And then also, we're going to look at all the different options, and if we can, a lot of it is just cost benefit analysis. If we can get a quote for $250,000 of coverage that is the exact same price as something that's $100,000 worth of coverage, we may not feel that we need the extra, to go to the $250,000 limit, but just financially, it makes perfect sense for us to do that. And maybe that catches, a nightmare scenario and for no additional cost. So we need to weigh all those factors to determine what an individual organization needs. Another, just really quick, another factor that's really important with that is that you may not choose your limit. You may be dictated your limit because maybe you're working with a university that requires all of their vendors to have $1 million limit on their cyber insurance policy. So if that happens, we get those calls all the time where, hey, I thought I was fine with my $100,000 limit, but now I need $1 million because I'm doing this big job. It's very simple for us to quote that up, and we're going to be able to outline, half a dozen different options, maybe more, in a matter of a couple days, for you to evaluate and say, okay, yes, I can take that big job because I know, the impact on my insurance is not as much as I had feared.
All right. So I've got another question here. How long does it take to get compliant with NIST CSF? So I think that one's in my wheelhouse. So NIST CSF has 6 functions we've talked about, to govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. But under those 6, we've got 22 categories, and I think it's 106 subcategories. So it can easily take a full year to be NIST CSF compliant. But the important thing is to start that process, and then through the process, we also go through and we identify, kind of not just the low-hanging fruits, but which issues do we have to address we would consider like a critical vulnerability or a critical issue. And then from a prioritization standpoint, they go from critical down to low, and we can prioritize hitting them at that area. So, but also remember that, getting compliant is not just one and done. It's going to be an ongoing process that needs to be continued. Again, most of the time you've got to have evidence quarterly that all these things that you said you're going to do in your policies and procedures have been done. But every time your systems change, if you get a new ERP system, or, you go from QuickBooks, Enterprise on an on-premise system up to QuickBooks Online, that's a very different system now to protect, and you've got to create new procedures and steps to make sure you're covering that type of situation through there. But this is something that you will do ongoing and ongoing. It's going to be the most amount of work probably in the first year to get yourself where you need to be, and then just remember you've got to maintain it. And I've just got one other question here, and it looks like this one's for you, Bill. So what is the process then for getting a quote on cyber liability insurance?
Yeah, great question. It's a super easy process. Pretty much, someone within the organization will get in contact with me and say, hey, we want a quote on our cyber liability insurance. I'll set up a meeting with them either in person or virtually, and we'll just go through the 30 questions that are in a typical cyber insurance application. And we'll just color code those because it's an ensemble approach. We'll color code those by who has that information. It could be, what is our, company revenue? Well, hey, maybe if I'm talking to an IT person, they probably don't know that answer. So I'll need to talk to a business owner or somebody in accounting. If I'm talking to somebody in a business owner in accounting, they're not going to know a lot of the IT questions. So we're going to highlight those a different color. And so once I understand who the people are, I have the contact information for each. I basically reach out to those 2 or 3 people, and we just address the questions that we already know you have access to the answers. Once I have those, I put them into a system, and typically within 24 hours, I will have anywhere from 5 to 20 different insurance companies willing to provide some sort of a quote. That's probably in 95% of cases. 5% of cases, there may be a particular part of your your business structure or organizational structure that needs to be dove into a little bit further, or there may be some answers on the application that weren't quite well understood by the insurance underwriters. But the vast majority of the time, we're going to have a significant number of options where we're going to be able to put these quotes together. Then what I would ask to do is review your existing coverage. And that's when we're going to do the stoplight approach. So you'll send me over a copy, if you can find it, of your existing cyber insurance policy. I will take a look at it. I'll do that stoplight approach and say, hey, these are the red light items, yellow light items, green light items, and then put that side by side with the pricing analysis that we just did so that you can see, okay, here's how we're going to solve the problems, and here's how much it's going to cost for this level of coverage versus this level of coverage. Overall, it's a process that should theoretically, if we have all the documents readily available and I'm able to speak to all the players involved, it's a process that should really only take a matter of a few business days.
All right. Well, I don't have any more questions that came through, so thank you again for joining us today. How Ohio House Bill 96 and Ohio Revised Code Section 9.64 may feel like just one more requirement, but it can also be a positive opportunity to strengthen your organization, protect your community and make better decisions around technology and risk. So remember, it's not about fear, it's about preparation, and preparation begins with one step. So here on the screen, you've got my contact information, Bill's contact information, both of our websites there. Please reach out to either Bill or I if you have any questions, even in the future, and if we can help you in any way. And that's the end of our presentation. So stay safe out there and have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon.